to first start by helping you think about what are your sources of revenue for a cow-calf operation. You really have two sources of revenue. One that you may not think of as a source of revenue, but I think JJ's probably talked a little bit about cull cows, and then I know Brian was too. I thought that was a really cool exercise going through with the actual cows from his herd, and I don't know where he went, but I especially enjoyed that picture from high school or junior high. I don't know how old you were. But at any rate, so you really have two sources of revenue. One is those cull cows, which typically make up about 10 to 20% of an operations revenue in any given year. And those cull cows are really, think of the revenue from those as really a salvage value from an asset. So if you had a factory, you would have some machinery in there that you have to replace occasionally, and when you're done with it, its useful life is over for you, you see what you can get out of it, and that's the salvage value of it. The value of those cull cows is the same idea. And then your second source of revenue is your commercial product, which for you is your calves. So what I want to talk about this evening is looking at how do you maximize the value of those calves that are the 80 to 90% of your revenue every year. One thing to understand is just like sending a kid to daycare for the first time or school for the first time. You know, we always joke that the first year that a kid's in school, they're sick every other week because they've not been exposed to all those germs. That same idea is true for calves. Okay, weaning them, taking them away from their moms, moving them off the ranch, it's stressful for them. It stresses their immune system, which is not yet fully developed. And then it also places them, after you sell them, in a place where they're exposed to a lot of germs that they've never been exposed to before. And so moving those calves is stressful. And calf health is critical not only to you while they're on your ranch, it's critical as they move through the system. So the healthier that we can keep those calves through the system, the more value that they bring to each phase throughout the system. One key thing here, see if I can get a point, here we go, sort of a pointer. One thing that the literature has and the research has reiterated over and over is the key thing is to avoid simultaneously weaning, mixing, and transporting them. So taking them away from their mom, mixing them with calves from other sources, and moving them somewhere else. Those three things are the greatest stressors for those calves. So we're going to talk some about options to separate those functions that can bring value not only to the rest of the system, but to you as well. So the impacts of preconditioning, it's going to increase performance again through the system. And typically buyers are going to recognize that value, and they're going to recognize that value by putting more money in your pocket if you've done the things that they believe will help keep those calves healthier through the system. So it can be a win-win, but it's not without risk either, right? Nothing is free, so there are costs to managing calves in that way. So a few years ago, we did a survey at Oklahoma State of cow-calf producers across the state of Oklahoma, and what we asked producers in that survey was, what do you do on your ranch in terms of management practices? What don't you do on your ranch? And if you don't, why not? We're not necessarily going to get into the whys and why nots tonight, but I do have some of the numbers from sort of adoption rates. This graph shows, this is non-adopters. So if you look at that 28%, this survey was done in 2010, so it's 2009 data, I believe. So that would say 28% of the producers who responded to that survey did not castrate their bull calves before they marketed them. Okay. That is one number I do know from the new survey, it's closer to about 16%. So that's good. I'm really pleased to see that number. But this just gives you an idea, you know, things like castration, deworming, bunk training, those are happening relatively often with still room for improvement for sure. Record keeping, not so much. Not so much. And we've done some research on, you know, are there some things that we know about producers that would distinguish why they do or why they don't? And no, it's just kind of, y'all just don't like to do it. I don't know. I'm assuming because you're here, you do, right? This chart, I won't spend much time on it. It's basically a different way to look at that same data. So this says, this is adoption rates, But think of this as, it's not quite a pie, but it's kind of a pie. If we split those practices into things we might call basic, so castration, deworming, dehorning, kind of basic management practices, that takes up a bigger chunk of this chart. If we then add those 3 practices that we would layer on and call it preconditioning, then it's not as big of a piece as basic, so lower adoption rates in general, but it kind of gives you a picture of, we have a lot of producers who are doing those basic things. We have room for improvement, for sure. But then we have fewer who are layering on those preconditioning practices, and then the record-keeping component. And then this little smaller slice, we call that marketing. It's really sort of marketing niches. So it's a choice. We didn't expect that one to be terribly high, because that would be a different, you each have different resources and different access to different kinds of markets depending on where you are. You have different types of genetics in your herd. You have different choices about what you want to do with those calves. This is sort of niche marketing. So if you're not treating them with antibiotics because you are marketing them that way, that's what that question would be asking you. Age and source verification, it's pretty small. For a little while, it was really, really important because of export markets. That's changed. It could change again, right? Could change again next week. So we do track that. And then implanting, that one, I'll probably hit this later, but you wouldn't necessarily think about implanting as a marketing strategy, but we do have some that would believe that if they don't implant those calves before they take them to the market, that maybe they can be sold as natural and get a little bit of a premium. But the reality is they can't be marketed as natural unless they're in a process verified program that is tracking the chain of command to be sure that they've not been implanted all along the way. So every time they change hands, that information has to go with them and it has to be certified. And so we've seen a real decrease in implants, and you'll see that in the back pages of my presentation in your booklet. But we've seen a sharp decrease. Back in the 90s, that was around 65. So really big drop. And all we can surmise is that it has something to do with that idea of if we don't implant them, we might be able to market them as natural calves. But the reality is you can't unless you're already in that kind of program. What is preconditioning? It's a typical health management protocol, and programs can vary a little bit, but in general, they're going to have the same basic things wrapped up in those, and it's going to be no horned calves, bull calves have to be castrated and healed, a set of vaccinations, 45-day weaning. Some might be 30 days, although the research now really is pushing folks to go that extra 2 weeks because there's real value in how much that immune system matures in that additional 2 weeks. Some benefits to preconditioning. You're going to market those calves at a heavier weight if you're keeping them on the ranch for 45 days longer. Right? You're going to have some weight gain while they're there. You're going to have less shrink at sale time because their immune system is mature and they're going to be a little more capable of handling the stress of moving. But if you look at seasonal prices for calves in that 5 weight range, the prices for those calves are moving upward from October to December in a typical year, okay? And so you're marketing a little bit into that upward movement of that price, and that helps a bit too. So there are two different ways you can capture premiums. One is for the healthier calves, or what's presumed to be going to be a healthier calf as it moves through the system. And the other is those calves are probably going to start better on wheat or in the feedlot because they're assumed to have fewer health problems as they move through. Okay, so let's just look at one example. We're just looking just at the value of the weight gain. But let's assume you've got a 500-pound calf and you're going to wean it at 500. Let's assume it's going to gain. I'm assuming a lot of things because I'm an economist and that's what we do. But we do it based on some animal science research. So we're all good back there, right? Okay. We're going to assume pound and a third of gain per day, about an 8% price slide. And actually, in this example, I went to the 2017 prices and picked the dates, the weaning date and the sale date for that October OQBN sale. and looked at what the prices were for a 500-pound calf on that date. So these are real prices from 2017. The value at weaning would have been $936.25 for that calf. Okay, the value of just the weight gain, so this is without a premium. This is no premium for any of the management practices you've done. It's just the weight gain from holding that animal is about $31.49, because if you add the 60 pounds that it's gained, again, that price is lower, right? Because as you sell into a heavier market, that price is sliding. But at the same time, that price has also been creeping up a little because of the seasonal. So it's not as big of a gap. So you're selling a little bit into that upswing, even though if you look at it there, well, that number's lower. It is, but it's not as low as it would have been. So the value of gain, just the pounds, is $31.49. I haven't said anything about what yet. What's missing?
Death loss.
Death loss. Feed costs. Right. So it's not free. Vaccinations. We haven't talked about cost yet, but we will. So here's that seasonal price increase. If we look at the 500-pound, that's going to be the blue and the green. Kind of depends on where you hit it. This blue is 400 to 500 pounds. And you see October, it starts to move up. The green is the slightly heavier 5 to 6 weights. It's a little flatter, but it's still a slight seasonal increase during that time period. So that's just a typical pattern. Why do buyers offer premiums? They offer premiums because they believe those calves in general are going to be healthier for them. They're going to have to treat them less. They're going to gain better. So they believe in the value of preconditioning, and most are willing to pay for that. And so if we look here, this is just feedlot performance from preconditioned versus non-preconditioned calves. The first thing that jumps out is that's a big difference in the percent of animals sick, right? 9% versus 36. It's a big difference. The percent deads, so death loss, 1.5% versus 3 times that, 4.3. So that's a pretty big difference as well. Feed conversion, not as drastic, but still that's a decent difference. And then the looking further out, the percent that actually grade choice is higher for those calves that come in as preconditioned calves than for those calves that don't. And then the percent of outs, those are the ones who they don't fit the packer system. So you get discounted for those, either too small or too big or too just don't grade well at all. So it's a much smaller percent for those preconditioned calves. So if you look at this alone, it can tell you why someone in the system might be willing to pay a little bit more for those calves that have been managed that way. So OQBN is a partnership between OCA and Oklahoma Cooperative Extension. Extension certifies those calves, so if you're interested in participating, you contact your extension agent. They put you in touch with the right folks. Someone comes out to your ranch to verify your health management protocol, verify that you've got the calves, you've done the things, and then help you get those to the right places to sell those animals in a place that's more likely to bring you a premium for those kind of calves. The program itself, there's the sale program, the calf program. There's also an educational effort that comes with it, and I would consider this part of that. Part of what we're going to look at is the value of those practices, and I think that's good for y'all to see over time. But it's not a guarantee every year, but over time, we'll take a look at what's been happening in that market. This just gives you an idea of what the requirements are for OQBN, and you can go, the website here, it's a pretty simple website. It's just oqbn.okstate.edu. And if you go to that page, you can look up the protocols. You can also look year by year and sale by sale at the summaries for individual sales. So when we have a sale in Cherokee, we do a summary of that sale of preconditioned versus non-preconditioned on that day at that sale, and it's put on the website pretty quickly. And so that's available, and it goes out to extension probably more quickly than it's actually posted on the website. So if you know that, for example, there was a sale in Cherokee on October 25th, you could call Brian a couple days later and say, hey, have you seen that? Have you seen that yet? or JJ, and they would have it. So just quickly, the requirements, home raised. They don't want you to go buy a bunch of other people's calves and do this protocol, right? Want it to be your calves. So home raised, and following this protocol, there's some different options on vaccinations. You can go to the website and look at those. Dehorned and healed, weaned at least 45 days. Sometimes we have calves come through that have been weaned 75 or 90. So that's your choice, but the requirement is at least 45. BQA guidelines are supposed to be followed. There's a tag that when you enroll in the program, then you get tags for those calves that signifies they are OQBN calves. And then again, the third-party verification. This is sale locations from last fall. I realized I left off Perkins because it was the first year Perkins has done one. And it wasn't a real big sale because it was really cold and rainy and yucky that day. But it was a good sale for those animals that did come there. I think there were fewer than 100 head, but those animals did well. There just weren't a lot of calves in general at that sale because of the weather. But I did leave them off. So we had Perkins, we had 2 at El Reno, we had 2 at Woodward, we had 1 at Cherokee, and then 1 at Blackwell, and then several at McAllister. McAllister does the fall sale, but then they do a series of sales in the spring and summer as well. And so Brian's real good to go collect that data for us and send it. We go physically collect the data at the fall sales with their help as well, but then he kind of does it by himself in the spring and summer. So I probably need to. Yeah, I probably need to buy ice cream cones or something. I don't know, but it's very helpful. So this is where our information that I'm about to show you comes from. Yes, this gives you an idea of what's coming up in 2019 that we know of so far. So there could be other sales added to this list, but these are the ones that we know are already scheduled. So you can see it's those same locations that have already said, yes, we're doing it, and here's our dates. But there certainly could be some more. So if you check back with that website. So this is just historically the average premium. This is one number for all the calves in that year. So you can see we can slice and dice that a lot of ways, and we're going to do that a little bit in just a minute. But this is the big number when somebody says, how did OQBN calves do this year? This is the one number you would see reported somewhere. Well, they brought almost $13 a head premium. $13 per hundredweight, sorry, not a head, not per head, per hundredweight premium. Again, what's not in that number? Death loss, cost, we haven't factored that out. This is just pure, how much better did these calves do at the sale than the calves that weren't preconditioned? That's the measure of this number. So you can see it's been pretty steady since we kind of relaunched it. I just have back to 2011. The program actually started in the early 2000s. And then it kind of dwindled down to just OKC West, and then we had to get together and make a decision, okay, do we really put resources behind this? Or do we let it die and just be at the one sale barn? And the decision was to put resources behind it. And so that really relaunched in 2010. And then this is data since 2011. So you can see those premiums in general have been pretty steady. 2014, we weren't really sure what to expect because prices jumped so high. So it's like, okay, are buyers still going to be willing to pay even more for preconditioned calves? Or are they going to say, I'm already paying this much, I'm not paying very much more? They paid more. So to me, that was real validation that they believe in that health management protocol, not just for OQBN calves, but across the board for other industry programs as well. That was a signal to me that they really value it. They see the value in that. And then you can see we 16 last year, almost 13 this year. We're going to break it down a different way. This is also just from this last fall. So the orange is OQBN calves. The silver, or the darker gray, is VAC 45 calves, but not certified in any program. So those are calves that come through and they say they've been weaned 45 days, they've had all their shots, you know, it's those calves. So they're not certified, but they appear to have those layers of practices on them, aside from the certification. And then just long weaned. So, you know, if they said 45 days weaned or more, but nothing else, those calves are in the light gray. Again, that's the big number over there, the 12, you know, the almost $13. you're probably going, well, why is the OQBN number smaller, right? I know y'all are thinking that, aren't you? Why is it smaller? Well, it is smaller, but let's first think about where we're selling those calves. We're selling them on a day that's a special sale day. So those livestock markets are saying, okay, we're going to have good preconditioned calves here this day. Y'all come buy them, right? So the buyers come, but the sellers also know the buyers are coming, and so you get a lot of reputation cattle that come to those sales as well, that maybe they're not certified, or maybe they're not even vaccinated, but they're long weaned, but they're larger lots. They have a reputation already with the buyers. So that's kind of that's how I would explain this difference, is that to me, what OQBN does is it gives you the opportunity to come in and compete with them on a more level footing than you would without that kind of program. It's like OQBN acts, or other industry programs might act a little bit as your reputation if you haven't been able to establish one yet, or not big enough to feel like you can. OQBN, in a way, and those other programs kind of step in and acts as your reputation to say, these calves have had these things done and you can trust it. There's the reputation/trust factor and who you're competing with, but then there's also the lot size. And so if we look at the average lot size for OQBN, ironically was 11 across steers and heifers. And then for the non-certified calves, you can see the heifer lot size was a little bit lower, but the steers was bigger, and on average it was bigger. So the lot size was a little bigger. Long weaned was pretty similar. So a little bit of that might be lot size effect for the dark gray, for the non-certified calves. But when you think about the reputation effect, the lot size effect, the nature of those sales that pulls in other really high quality calves, not to say the OQBN aren't, but it's pulling in other high quality calves that they know those buyers are going to be there and see those calves. But the non-certified is basically, could be anyone sitting in this room who says to the auctioneer, I'm doing these things, and it's everything that an OQBN producer would be doing, but they're not certified. So it's sort of that, we'd call it a credence thing. Is it believable or is it not? And so it depends on their reputation a little bit, how believable they are. So they may not feel the need to go through a third-party certification because they already have established a reputation. So higher prices for larger lots. I just wanted to give an example of what those numbers look like. Down at the bottom, that's the number of head that come into the ring at one time as a lot to purchase. And you can see that very quickly, that number, if you go from 1 head to 2, or let's just go to the 5 to 10, at 5 head, I'm at a little angle, so it's kind of like trying to call a ball or a strike from the side of the plate. If you move that lot size to 10 head, that's another 260 almost for the same calves. It's just more of them. So buyers are willing to pay those premiums. And this is over, 2010 to 2013. That's probably, I would venture to say, at least 50,000 animals that data would be collected on. I'm not sure what the number of lots, but because we collect data not just on the OQBN calves when we go at least an hour early and collect data on those calves that are not in the program, and then we stay for the entire OQBN sale, and then we hang out for another hour or so and get another round of calves that are not in the OQBN program, so that we have something to compare to. So this is across all those calves, not just OQBN. But I just wanted to show you the power of more calves in a pen coming through the auction. I just wanted to illustrate for you what do those real numbers actually look like when you run all those numbers together on a bunch of calves. This is what we come out with. Now we're getting to the point where we really need to do it again. I suspect, because the last was 2013, I suspect those numbers won't change a lot. They might change a little, but probably not a lot. Brian mentioned black calves and premiums. This just gives you an idea. On average, from 2013 to 2017, I didn't get 2018 wrapped up in here, but Brian had done the averages for this set of years. And you can look, those numbers are pretty, oh, this isn't premium, sorry. I thought I had premiums in here. This is the percent of calves that came through the market in the data. So you can see mostly black or blacks mixed, pretty high percentage, almost 80%. And then red's growing. That number might move more over the next 3 years because we've really seen an increase in red calves at the sales the last couple of years in particular. So I expect that number to be going up. White and gray stays pretty steady at around 6 or 7% in terms of the number of calves. Now this is lots, so this would be a whole lot. So a black mixed would be, let's say if you had a lot of 20 calves, it might be 16 black and 4 grays. We would call it a black mixed. Same with the idea of the red mixed. So those are, they're mostly black or mostly red. And then a few Longhorn and Dairy come through, a few Hereford, some pure Brahma come through occasionally. And then mixed, we've kind of joked that we really need to upgrade that category to pretty mixed and ugly mixed. We need a better way to distinguish mixed. But mixed also can, so this is color and breed. We also have a mixed category for pens that come through that are not just steers or not just heifers. So if it's a mixed lot of steers and heifers or it has bulls in it, that brings a discount as opposed to a steady price or a premium. So if you mix those lots in terms of genders, then you get a lower price for that lot. Here's the breakdown on genders. Majority steers, 52. About 7% of the lots that come through are mixed lots. So it might be all bulls. It might be 3 steers and a heifer. It might be 2 bulls and a steer. But if it's not pure steer, pure heifer, it goes into that mixed category. And we get about 7% of the lots that come through are that category. This gives you an idea of the data that we're collecting. And again, 2018's, those numbers are relatively close to what 2017 was, just from memory. But you can see we're collecting several thousand head every year. And we feel like we need to keep doing that because it gives us a good basis for actually looking at what the program value is. I'm going to break it down. We did the one big number. We did OQBN versus non-certified versus just long weaned. Now we're going to look by gender. So if we break this down by gender, what's the first thing on this chart that jumps out at you? We've got weight at the bottom. So 3 weights, 4 weights, 5 weights. Orange is steers. The gray is heifers. Those 7-weight heifers did all right, didn't they? I'd like to have 1 or 2. One thing that we have difficulty tracking in the data, and there are some years that we see this to a greater extent than others, where are those 700-pound, 800-pound heifers going? We can't always track that, right? Sometimes they're purchased as replacements. Sometimes they're purchased for the feedlot. And so we don't have a good way of distinguishing that when we're collecting data at the sale. And so we can't pull that part out of there to know how much of that premium is because somebody's really happy to have a heifer coming onto their place that's probably going to be healthy and stay healthy versus somebody's decently happy that it's going to go to the feedlot and do okay. They're different, again, apples and oranges. And we can't ferret out of that number how much of that is the replacement heifer effect. But we're pretty certain at least a good chunk of it is the replacement heifer effect. Because if we go back year by year, you can start to see it. So this is one number for 3-weight steers on average from 2011 to 2018. So if you said, what's the average that an OQBN steer brought across the last 6 years? 7. Can't count. 7. I would say 1356. Okay. And so you can see that premium for the lighter weights tends to be a little heavier. For those 3-weight premiums, a lot of times it is a little bit lower than the 4s and 5s. We also have fewer animals coming in that light. And so we don't have a large number to compare them to. So I don't know if we had a larger number of calves in that weight range if that number would change or not. But I will point out it's not a lot of calves in that 3-weight. I think it's about And then, do I have 9 weights on here? No. I think the 3 weights, oh, that was mine. I think the 3 weights is maybe 4% of the calves that come through. And then the heaviest end is another 3%. So the bulk of those calves are between 4 and the 900. But anyway, you can see that on a per hundredweight basis, that premium is more for lighter calves. When we do that out on a per head basis, it evens out a little bit. So there's that value per head is typically within a $6 to $10 range, probably closer to $6. So the last 5, when you take out 11, 12, and 13, remember 14's the year we had the really high prices, you can see it jumps those averages up. This is heifers. So look at this one for a minute. Look at that one for a minute. What do you notice? The heifer premiums are more level. And again, we can't pull out that replacement heifer effect, but we're pretty sure it's in there. So if we can find a way to somehow collect that data, the trouble is when they sell them, the buyer doesn't stand up and say, I'm buying those for replacement heifers. But sometimes they are, and we can't know which are going where. But if you look at that, that's pretty level per head. Actually not level per head. Those heavier, because an 8 weight, let's look at the 7 weights, still getting 13 per hundredweight, but it's more hundredweights. So it's more per head for those heavier heifers. Whereas for the steers, in general, it's a little more per head for those lighter weight steers. But for the heifers, it's pretty clearly, on average, more per head. And we really do think that's a replacement effect. We just can't measure it. So again, I've been asking you, what's not in there? Well, the cost isn't in there, right? And these are some of the things you have to consider. You've got to feed those calves. You need to get them used to feed bunks. You've got all the animal health things, the vaccines, the blackleg, additional labor, right? You need to pay yourself. So the additional labor and management, sometimes there are tags that are required. For OQBN, there is for sure. Different programs have different requirements. Also, if you're selling on a percent basis for your marketing commission, you're selling a heavier animal, you're selling a higher price, your commission is going to be a little bit more. So don't forget to factor that in if you're trying to pencil out those costs. Actual preconditioning costs, the Noble Foundation, it's getting a little bit dated, and we've talked about trying to collaborate with them to do it again. But their cooperators in 04-05 tracked their costs for preconditioning, and their averages were around $50 a head. And honestly, the biggest variable in that is going to be feed cost. And so year by year, the other things have stayed pretty steady. And so that's a pretty good measure. It's still, when we estimate it, we estimate around 60, just to be conservative, to have a conservative measure of that. If you're feeding them some corn and corn's really high that year, obviously your feed costs are going to be a little bit more. So you got to think about what it is you're going to be feeding them and how those costs are going to be for that year. But the feed is the biggest component. Again, here's a conservative estimate. If we sold them in October, 500 weight, this is 2015 prices. So I gave you a couple different years just so you could see it changes a little bit, right? I can't guarantee you it's always going to be this number, and I can't even guarantee you that it's always going to be positive, although our research has shown that there's a really strong chance that it's going to be positive. But the value at weaning in October was a little over $1,000 in 2015. The value at marketing, just by weight, was $1,177. So the value of the weight gain was $62.76. That's a bigger number than we looked at earlier, right? That was like 39 something. So that's just the difference in the value of the weight in 2017 versus 2015. Okay. Then we look at the preconditioning premium, and at that weight in that year, it was about $7 a hundredweight. So that premium was $39 roughly. You add those together, that's your total increase in revenue for that calf. So about $101, $102 in that range. Again, the cost estimate for all those vaccines, for the value of your labor across whatever calves you're keeping, the feed, we estimate that around $60. The net value of preconditioning is about $42 in that year for that calf. Here's the other year that we looked at earlier. The value of the weight gain, remember, was $31.49. So this was 2017 prices. The price slide was a little less, I believe, in that year. At any rate, so the premium was a little more, right? So 560 pounds at $11 a hundredweight, $61.60. The total revenue increase was $93 compared to the total increase of $102 in the other year. So your net value is a little bit lower, right? About $8 lower. But I did the 2 different years. I mean, I could do an average for you, and that would be useful. But to me, I wanted you to see the difference just that any given year might make. That, you know, it's going to look a little different, but I want you to have in your mind the things that you need to consider if you're thinking about doing that. So the probability of profitability, I mentioned a minute ago, I can't guarantee you there's always going to be a profit. Can't guarantee you it's always going to be $50 a head. But we did take all the data that we collected in 2010, which is different than the data we've collected in all the other years. And it's different because we sat in sale barns on 30 different days. We went to every sale barn where there was going to be an OQBN sale. We went the week before that sale and collected about 3 hours worth of data at about the time the OQBN sale was going to be. And then we went the week of the OQBN sale, and then we went the week after. And so we did that for all 10 sales that we had scheduled that year. So we got 30 different sale dates worth of data in that data set, and it's really big, but we're about to need to do it again. Right, Brian, we're about to need to do it again. Because it is starting to get a little dated, but I think there's still some value in that data that we can learn about a lot of different things. And so what we did is we took that big data set and we said, okay, if as a producer you're weaning, vaccinating, and dehorning, if that's your bundle of practices that you're doing with that calf before it leaves your ranch, you could expect a net return of around $50 in 2010 and about a 70% probability that your return was at least going to be positive. Okay? So that 49 is on average across all the calves that had this applied to them, and we assumed, again, we're economists, and so we assumed the cost of doing that. I can't recall what that number actually was. Basically, if you did those 3 things, you had a 70% probability of having a positive return to your pocket for doing that. A VAC 45, so that's going to be an OQBN, or it might be a Memorial Sure Health. I mean, there's different programs out there, but the VAC 45, most of those in this data were OQBN. There's a handful of others, but mostly OQBN. The expected net return was 58, so a little bit higher, and the probability of a positive net return was also higher. So 80% probability that you would at least put some money back in your pocket. There is a budget tool out there on OSU's website for OQBN, and you can access it here. It'll let you kind of go, it's basically an outline in a spreadsheet of the things you need to consider if you're thinking about doing it. So you can go put in some expected premiums, you can put in expected feed cost, how you want to value your labor. You can put those things in and look at whether you, and what you expect prices to be in that year from October to December. And there's some places you can go and find that as well. But if you'll go to that page, it'll help you think about what you need to consider. Right? And for some of you, resources just in terms of a place to keep those calves, if you've always just weaned them on the trailer on the way to the sale, maybe you don't have a place to keep them, But so part of the consideration is what resources do you have access to? Do you have a place to keep those calves? Do you have a chute, or can you borrow one, to run them through? So I know those are concerns for some, and so you have to think about what your resources are. Can't talk tonight. What your resources are, and how that might impact which of those things you can layer together to market your calves. One thing that we have seen across the years is it matters where you sell your calves. Okay? And the thing about where you sell them, it's not the geography that makes it a better sale, it's how many other calves of a similar quality are there, how many buyers are going to be at that sale. You know, if you've got a sale where the buyers know there are going to be a lot of preconditioned calves here, and maybe other calves that are high quality calves that maybe don't have quite as many of those practices layered on them, but still good calves, you're going to draw more buyers. And if you draw more buyers, you tend to have higher premiums for those calves. And the markets tend to be a little bit better. And so it does matter where you sell those calves. So if you do preconditioning and then you just take them to a sale barn that's not really going to have many others there, and maybe not going to expound the value of what that is for the buyers, then your premiums may look different. So keep that in mind too. It does matter where and how you market those calves. I will say we have probably 1/3 of the OQBN calves that were enrolled in the program for the last 3 years have been direct marketed. So that's an option. We have some producers who go through the program and get the certification, but then they're marketing directly to a buyer. So those calves are never coming through the sale. Now the downside for me is we don't have the data on those calves. We just know that they're being direct marketed, but we don't know the prices. I would like to know those prices. So if any of you direct market your calves and would be so kind as to share that information, we'd love to have it. But it is an option for you. You don't have to bring them through the sale. You can get them certified and market them on your own. So this is just an illustration, and I know it's in your book, but it's basically saying the more preconditioned lots that are at the sale, the better those premiums are. Buyers are willing to pay for it. It's not free for you to do. So you got to balance what your resources are, what your abilities are, and figure out if it might work for you. The last pages, and I'm not going to walk through these because they're in your book and you can take a look at them, but I put in there some information on some of the USDA process verified programs, so things like the natural program, the never ever, so no antibiotics, no hormones, no animal byproducts for feed. Did I get that right? Some of those kinds of programs, that information is in there. The other information is the grass-fed. The USDA certified grass-fed program now only exists for small producers, so less than 50 head. So if you fit that category and you think that your resources might enable you to do some grass-fed kind of marketing, you can find information about how USDA does that through here. But they rescinded their programs for larger producers, but they kept the one for what they call small and very small. So if you fit into that category, less than 50 head, that's a potential resource for you if you think you might want to go the grass-fed angle. Okay. Here's information on the organic programs and the never ever. So you can go to USDA's website and there's a lot of good information there. If you look at those and then you've got questions, give Brian a call, give me a call. We'd be happy to help you get the information you need if we don't have it and if you can't find it on there. This is other places to look for how to access programs, so not just OQBN. We are an option, but we're not your only option, and we understand that. We're not trying to compete necessarily. We are set up so that you can, what we call it, dual certification, I guess. So if you're certified through your association or something, you can also do OQBN and layer those if you want. Overall, again, it can add value, but it's not free. It's also not risk-free. Right, we talked about death loss. You have to factor that in too.